let's start with currency, and I won't be going in any particular order as we have learned. So starting with currency, spot and forwards. Okay, spot matlab you want the delivery in the spot market. You want to take or give the delivery in spot market, which is usually on what basis? T plus 2 basis. Okay, and who are the participants? Sell side, buy side participants. Sell side participants means the authorized dealers or authorized to transact in foreign exchange. It can be anyone, banks, and then authorized dealers as such who have only the business of currency exchange. Then I told you one example, Dhakad foreign exchange. Okay, then it can be hotels, airports, etc. Fine. Sell side participants. Buy side participants में traders, governments, businesses, who else? Sovereign wealth funds, whoever wants to basically invest, investors like that. Okay, now as regards the quotation, how is the quotation done? It is done in terms of points, forward points. So spot is 80.1234 INR per USD, which means what? For every $1 80.1234 is the value of Indian rupees. Okay, now if 1 year forward points is plus 160, so how will you find out the forward rate? It will be spot rate plus forward points divided by 1 and how many zeros? 4, because after decimal in the spot there are 4 numbers, so as many numbers, those many zeros, right? You remember this? Okay, fine. And if the forward points are negative, so then you subtract it from the spot. Okay, clear? Okay. Now in terms of price and base currency, from this quotation, can you tell me which one is the price currency and which one is the base currency? INR is the price currency, USD is the base currency. I told you one simple way to remember, the base currency is in the basement, in the denominator, so that is the base currency. Okay, and quotation is always a price slash the base currency. Now as Indians, for us this is the direct quote. Whenever your domestic currency is the price currency, it is a direct quote for you, and for Americans this quote is indirect quote. So whenever your domestic currency is the base currency, it is what? An indirect quote for you. Okay, fine. Now we had learned the concept of cross rates. When two exchange rates are given and you want to find out the third rate, you can find out using the concept of cross rates. We had done multiple questions in class. Now I am not going into the question solving part and all. I had told you the technique to solve such questions. Okay, now say for example this quotation is given $1 is equal to 80.1234 INR. Now if I ask you to find out what is 1 INR equal to, 1 INR will equal how many dollars? What do? You simply take the reciprocal of it. Okay, now coming to the concept of spot and forwards again, between two currencies, which currency trades at a forward discount? The country where interest rates are high or low? High. Country where interest rates are high, that currency trades at a forward discount, and country where interest rates are low, that currency trades at a forward premium. Okay, so for example, 1 year interest rate in India is say 6% and 1 year interest rate in US is say 2%. So as per the formula, forward rate is equal to spot into 1 plus interest rate of price currency upon 1 plus interest rate of base currency. Fine, that will give you the forward rate. Okay, now just be careful about the fact that if they give you all the details and if they ask you the 6-month forward rate, so please appropriately adjust the interest rate. If they give an annualized interest rate, make sure you do it into 6/12 to convert it into the appropriate time period. Fine. Okay, fine. Then speaking about nominal and real exchange rates, the exchange rates which you see in the market. So currently if $1 is equal to 83 rupees, is that the real exchange rate or nominal exchange rate? Nominal exchange rate. Real exchange rate as such is nowhere quoted. You have to calculate the real exchange rate. Real exchange rate is equal to nominal into CPI. CPI was what? Consumer Price Index. It's a measure of inflation. CPI of base currency upon CPI of price currency. Now guys, from the last year as compared to last year, and quotation I take it this only, this quotation. The real exchange rate of USD has increased as compared to last year. Now I just tell you this much. Can you comment whether it has increased because of increase in nominal rate or because of changes in inflation? You cannot comment unless you know more details about it. All you can say is USD's purchasing power has increased in real terms if the USD exchange rate has increased, the real exchange rate. Now it could be either due to increase in the nominal exchange rate or due to changes in the inflation. Clear? Okay, we had taken numerical examples also for this. So I hope you remember this concept. Fine. Then as regards your currency regimes, countries that have their own currency and countries that do not have their own currency. One example of countries which do not have their own currency, we had discussed dollarization. Dollarization is what? Using the currency of another country. Not necessarily dollar, it can be dollar, euro and all. The list is given in your book. Okay. Then currency board arrangement. Currency board arrangement, we had taken the example of Hong Kong. For every Hong Kong dollar, there has to be a backup of US dollar, and the rate, exchange rate, moreover, is fixed. So Hong Kong dollar is pegged to the dollar, US dollar, and it is a formal agreement. It is a formal agreement. When I talk about only pegging the fixed exchange rate, then that's not an agreement as such. Okay, the peg can be broken anytime by the country which pegs it. Okay, now countries that do not have their own currency was this currency board arrangement. And no, sorry, currency board arrangement won't come here because Hong Kong has its own currency. Currency board arrangement will come here. Currency board arrangement, because Hong Kong has its own currency, right? Here, monetary union. Countries that do not have their own currency. Monetary union, do you remember the example? European Union. And in European Union, those countries which use euro as their official currency, those that group is called what? Eurozone. Okay, Eurozone. Okay, now coming back to countries that have their own currency. What is that term called where UAE used to peg its currency to US dollar? Pegging, but that had another name also. What was the jargon for it? Fixed peg? Fixed peg. Okay. Fixed peg is where a country fixes the exchange rate with another country's currency, usually either with dollar or with euro. Is any bandwidth allowed? Hardly of 1% bandwidth is allowed here and there, plus or minus 1% is allowed. Okay, so UAE, Saudi, all these countries, Oman, Kuwait, they peg their currency to the dollar. Now we had discussed the issues with pegging. Pegging is done by to give stability to the investors and all, but then the issues is that central bank loses its independence. The pegged exchange rate has to be maintained either by playing with the foreign exchange reserves or tweaking the interest rates. Central bank loses its independence in the sense that if my country is pegging its currency to another country's currency and other country hike the interest rates, so naturally that country's currency will appreciate in value and my country's currency, domestic currency, will depreciate in value. I want to maintain the pegged rate, so I also have to increase the interest rates in order to attract the investors. Now what if my country is going through a recession? Ideally I shouldn't have increased the interest rate such a point, but then I had to just to maintain the peg. This is what is the meaning of central bank losing its independence. Okay, now fixed peg with some a bandwidth allowed plus or minus 2%, it's called what? Target zone. Target zone. Now after target zone there was crawling peg. In crawling peg also, as a country, I will peg my country's currency to another country's currency, but periodically I will change the pegged exchange rate. Whereas in case of fixed peg, the pegged exchange rate remains the same. Okay, crawling peg may, as per the changes in economic conditions and all, the pegged rate also can change. It won't be so stubborn. Now you need not remember the names of the country which are following fixed peg or target zone or crawling peg. You just need to know the concept. Okay, after crawling peg, here also some bandwidth would be allowed, but if you want to have a wider bandwidth, that concept will be called crawling band. Crawling band. Okay, fine. Then there was managed float. Managed float after crawling band. Managed float is where a country's central bank will intervene in the foreign exchange markets if the exchange rate is going against its favor. So for example, if rupee depreciates too much vis-a-vis the dollar, so what will RBI do? RBI will pick up dollars from its foreign exchange currency chest and sell dollars in the market in order to depreciate the value of the dollar and appreciate the value of rupee. That is called managed float. And the last one is independent float. I hope you remember this. Okay, independent float. Fine. What else in this? Okay. Now talking about capital restrictions. I had given you the example of Malaysia in the year 1998, what it had done, capital restrictions it had imposed, what were the reasons and stuff that we had discussed. So now just let's quickly recall those points. To keep the interest rates low was one of the reasons. Second, to reduce the volatility in the currency, to maintain a fixed exchange rate, because if I am restricting the withdrawal by foreign investors, I'll be able to maintain a stable exchange rate. And finally, what? Protect strategic industries. Fine. But then the repercussions and all we had discussed. What were the repercussions once that lock-in period was over after 1 year? Currency had fallen. Investors, did they come back? No. Investors tend to lose confidence then in such a country. Malaysia was relegated from developed market to a developing market. Okay, the repercussions are very severe. Fine. Capital restrictions are imposed by India, China and all also, but not to such an extent. If I talk about India, so if you want your country's currency to be a reserve currency, capital convertibility and all has to be ensured. Your country's currency should be easily convertible. There should not be any restrictions as such. Okay, fine. Now talking about balance of payments, first we had discussed about trade deficit. Now trade deficit is what? Excess of imports over exports. But then I had given you an example, if you remember, that you guys are working abroad, won't you send home some money? Okay, that is called unilateral transfer. And similarly, if you guys had been studying abroad, your parents will send you money, that again will be a unilateral transfer of money. If you consider that also in trade deficit, then the resultant figure would be called either a current account deficit or a current account surplus. Current account deficit is when your foreign exchange outflows are more as compared to inflows, and current account surplus is vice versa. India persistently runs a current account deficit. That is also one of the reasons why the rupee has depreciated in such a free fall manner against the dollar. Earlier it used to be $1.50, then it settled at somewhere around 60, then 70, finally it is hovering at around 83 levels. That is because of a sustained current account deficit that India has been running with its trade partners. And US के साथ always we have had a current account surplus because we export more to US as compared to what we import, and moreover the unilateral transfers which come from US also are great. But then China के साथ we run a persistent current account deficit. China, Japan, Korea, such countries. That is why. Okay, anyway, not getting into those technicalities and details which we had already discussed during the lecture. Fine. Now remember GDP of a country. I had derived one equation. GDP of a country is C, consumption expenditure plus investment expenditure plus government expenditure plus exports minus imports. This is the formula of GDP using the expenditure approach. Likewise, the formula for GDP using the income approach is consumption. Okay, your income, out of your income, some part of it you would spend in consumption, savings, and some part of it you would pay in taxes, CST, that constitutes your entire income. Now theoretically speaking, GDP as per both the formula should be the same, because one person's income is another person's expenditure. So C plus I plus G plus X minus M is equal to C plus S plus T, cancelling out C on both the sides. Okay, now I'm left with, I'll just do some basic rearrangement. X minus M is equal to S minus I plus T minus G. Okay, now if you have a trade surplus, excess of exports over imports, either it could be due to your domestic savings exceeding domestic investments, or the government income exceeding the government expenditure. We had taken several numbers to understand the concept. If you are running a trade deficit, either it could be due to the investment exceeding the savings, or it could be because of government expenditure exceeding government income, or it could be due to both the factors coming to play. Fine. Okay. A country running a current account deficit, do you remember? A country running a current account deficit has to be financed with a capital account surplus, and a country running a current account surplus has to have a capital account deficit. We had discussed the example of India, current account deficit, so capital account surplus. Okay, capital account and current account, you need to know the difference. Any P&L items, I had explained you in that manner, any P&L items are current account items. Now P&L items not within the country, but anything pertaining to foreign currency. Government giving subsidies to domestic players, will it form a part of current account? No. Only anything involving foreign exchange, foreign currency, will be a part of current account, capital account. So any P&L items, current account. For example, government has taken a foreign currency loan, it is paying interest on it, it will form a part of current account. Imports, exports will form a part of current account. You can consider them as normal sales and purchases. Government taking a loan from US, capital account item, because it's a balance sheet item. Any balance sheet items involving foreign currency will be capital account transaction. Fine. Okay. Government giving loan to some other country, capital account transaction. Government investing in other countries' assets, capital account item. Government receiving interest and dividends on those investments, current account transaction. Okay, so you should know the difference between current capital account. That's why current account deficit has to be financed with capital account surplus. Okay, now these foreign investors investing money in our stock markets, bond markets and all that, do you call it current account item or capital account item? Capital account item, because one day they will take away their investment. So basically, if you see, it is a sort of liability for us. So it's a capital account transaction, and moreover from surplus deficit it will be a capital account surplus, because money is coming into the country, capital account surplus. Then when those foreign investors sell their investments and take away the money home, that will be capital account deficit, because foreign exchange is going out of the country. right? Okay, fine. I hope you remembered all this. In this chapter, I'll tell you what is important. Of course, theory part is definitely important, but especially focus on numbers, spot, forward, how to calculate the rates and all. And it is basic mathematics, still students get confused in calculation, so I hope that doesn't happen with you. Please be very careful of the periodicity. If spot rates are given, you have to find out forward rates. Interest rates are given to you, annualized interest rates. And if you are asked to find out only the 3-month forward, please adjust it appropriately for the periodicity. These are the small silly mistakes where you could go wrong. Okay, and they will definitely give you those options also where annualized interest rates are taken. They exactly know where students are going now. Okay, fine. So this is what we had discussed in currency. Okay. Yes. Impossible Trinity as such is not a part of your curriculum, that I had just discussed for your knowledge purposes. So right now my focus is only whatever is part of the curriculum. Okay. If you have any doubts pertaining to that extra part, you can ask me separately. Fine. Fine. Okay. Now I had shown you one shortcut also, how to calculate the currency forward premium or forward discount. Okay, not forward premium or forward discount as such, but if say $1 is equal to 100 rupees back then, and now $1 is equal to 110 rupees, has the dollar appreciated? Definitely, it's clearly visible the dollar has appreciated, but in percentage terms it has appreciated how much? 10%. Dollar has appreciated by 10%. Now naturally, if dollar has appreciated, rupee must have depreciated by how much? Now ordinary person, what they would do, they will find out the reciprocal and all that. Avoid such long cuts. I had given you one shortcut. 10% dollar appreciation, rupee depreciation is 10 divided by 110. That is the rupee depreciation. Percentage depreciation always will be less as compared to percentage appreciation, because in percentage depreciation, guys, and percentage appreciation depreciation, the numerator 10 is constant. In percentage appreciation, you are taking 10 as a percent of 100, and in depreciation you are taking 10 as a percent of 110. So if the denominator is higher, the number naturally has to be lower. That is why I tell you that percentage depreciation is always lower as compared to percentage appreciation. Getting the point? Okay, fine. Can I proceed then? Okay. Okay, so this marks the end of currency. Discussed everything pertaining to currency. Now let's discuss international trade. Okay, very interesting chapter, but a small chapter. International trade. We had discussed the benefits of international trade. As consumers, you get access to a wide variety of goods and services. There is competition among the industries, so you get better products. Okay, there is increased access to talent. Then there are disadvantages also, because domestic industries may not be able to compete with the foreign competition. See, Indian industries may not be able to compete with the competition posed by Chinese goods, because China many a times it dumps the products in India, selling below the cost price also, which the Indian manufacturers may not be able to sell at such a low price. Okay, fine. So then government, in order to discourage all this, imposes what? Tariffs, anti-dumping duty and all that, duties, tariffs, etc. Fine. So this brings me to the basic concepts pertaining to international trade. Imports, exports. Of course, need not explain imports, exports. Tariffs, quotas. Tariffs is monetary amount charged by the government when the goods are imported into the country. Quotas are what? Government won't charge any monetary amount, but government will impose a limit on the quantity imported. Quota. Beyond that, if the country wants to import, then it will have to pay tariffs, or the government may upfront deny that only you can import to the extent of the quota limits given, right? Okay, then there was minimum domestic content. Minimum domestic content may, I had given the example of Apple, if it wants to manufacture iPhone in India, some raw materials will compulsorily have to be procured from India. That was the concept of minimum domestic content. Then export subsidies. Export subsidies, we had taken the example of what? Sugar. Government used to give export subsidies to the sugar industry, and Brazilian government also used to give export. I think it was the Brazilian government that used to give export subsidies to the sugar industry, because Brazil is the largest manufacturer of sugar in the world. But then that may tantamount to some disputes raised by some foreign trading partners, and all such disputes pertaining to international trade are taken where? Are taken to WTO, World Trade Organization, right? Okay. Then export subsidies, we had also discussed voluntary export restraints. Government of India had imposed voluntary export restraints on what? Rice. Okay, I had told you what was the situation in US. It had imposed voluntary export restraints on some category of rice. I think non-basmati rice couldn't be exported or something. I don't remember the technicalities, but one of the categories of rice, like that. So it may do all such things when there is domestic shortage of goods. Okay, so for example, if there is domestic shortage of onions, government may impose VERs, voluntary export restraints, like that. Okay, fine. Yeah, so government had imposed a voluntary export restraint on sugar also, because then ethanol out of the sugar could be used for petroleum products. Okay, fine. Then we had discussed the implication of tariffs and quotas and everything. I had made a diagram, if you remember. This is the supply curve, this is the demand curve, this is the world price. World price is that price which is without imposition of any tariffs, which is globally the same. World price means quantity supplied, quantity demanded. Now quantity demanded domestically is way more than the quantity supplied. What to do then? Balance demand is met through imports. Now if no tariffs, nothing, then fine, things go as it is. But then if the government charges some tariffs, so domestic price would increase due to imposition of tariffs, and at a higher price quantity demanded would fall and quantity supplied would increase. This part is called what? Government surplus in the form of tariffs. Now I had told you that in case if you get such a question in exam where they ask you to do numerical calculations, that how much tariff, basically this is what a rectangle, area of rectangle is what? Length into breadth. Fine, little bit of geometry also that we do here. Then producer also will be able, domestic producer will be able to sell his products at a higher price. So this part represents what, guys? Producer surplus. Now if I ask you to find out the producer surplus, it is basically the area of this rectangle, which is length into breadth, minus the area of triangle. You take out the triangle area, half into base into height. Okay, so you get the producer surplus. Now this entire red area will be what? Loss in consumer surplus. Okay, so one party's surplus is other party's loss. Government is enjoying surplus, which is consumer's loss. Producer is enjoying a surplus, which is consumer loss. So consumer loss is not just restricted to government surplus and producer surplus. Consumer loss exceeds that. This part also represents consumer loss. These two triangles. This is also consumer loss only, apart from the blue shaded area. So this black triangle, I had given you one more name for it. Deadweight loss. Neither a benefit to the country, matlab government or producer, nor a benefit to the consumers. The country as a whole stands to lose. Okay, this was in case of tariffs. In case of quotas also, the benefits earlier were accruing to the exporting country, you remember, which are called quota rents, benefits accruing to the exporting country. Now domestic government was furious. So what did the domestic government do? Charged license fees to the importers, due to which the exporters had to slash their prices. So the quota rents which were earlier accruing to the exporters now accrue to domestic government. So this is called what? Capture of quota rents. You remember this example? And finally, we had discussed the implication of voluntary export restraint. In case of a voluntary export restraint, it is always the exporting country's government which benefits. Okay. Now, voluntary export restraint government of India had imposed on rice. Now the importing country US, it is in need of rice. So US cannot afford to put any tariffs or quotas or anything. So in that case, it will never happen that importing country's government will have some benefit. It is always the exporting country's government that will benefit out of it. Okay, in case of voluntary export restraints. Now if I am a rice exporter, government of India has imposed VERs on me, whatever limited supply I can make, I will make it at a higher price. Who's benefiting? The exporting country is benefiting, like that. Okay, but in case of tariffs and quotas, I repeat, the importing country will benefit. In case of tariffs, to be very specific, importing country will benefit in the form of government surplus and producer surplus, but then consumer as a whole will lose much more, resulting in a net deadweight loss to the country. In case of quota, either the exporting country can benefit when they capture the quota rents, or the importing country can benefit when the government decides to impose license fees and capture the quota rents. Okay, very critical concepts to know. Testable. Fine. Okay. Any doubts in this concept? Fine. Now coming to the interesting part. Those forms of agreements between countries. I had given you one mnemonic to remember. That clothing brand, French connection, UK. K was just for the effect. So K I had put in small letter, and whatever is there was in capital letter. FCU, C, the progress of emerging markets. F stands for free trade areas. CU stands for customs union. C stands for common market. E stands for economic union. M stands for monetary union. You will have to remember in the exact same order. You cannot jumble up the order, because with every successive point, one additional point gets added. Okay. Free trade area, only free movement of goods and services between the countries which are a part of the FTA. Okay. India is signing FTA with so many countries, we had discussed. Okay. Is the process so easy, signing FTA with countries, or there are multiple rounds of negotiations that go on? Multiple rounds of negotiations that go on. Who is handling that from India's side? I told you. Commerce and Trade Secretary is who? Piyush Goyal. He handles all these negotiations. Of course, his team, but he is the representative, main representative. CU stands for Customs Union. The point which is applicable in free trade areas, that is the common point. And one more additional point in the form of what? The member countries, they will have same set of rules when dealing with non-member countries. Then coming to common market, same 2 points as applicable in customs union, plus one more additional point. Free movement of labor across the member countries. Okay, fine. Economic union, same 3 points applicable up to a common market. Which is the additional point? Governing body, the economic body is the same. Economic governing body is the same. Okay, and example here was European Union, and finally monetary union. All 4 points up to economic union same, plus one additional point is the member countries use common currency. Example we had taken was Eurozone. Okay, and one more example we had taken, West African Economic and Monetary Union, Central African Economic and Monetary Union. That again is an example of monetary union. Fine. Okay. This again is testable from this chapter. So you have to remember the sequence properly. Okay. Yes. 3 points common up to common market. One additional point, fourth point was that the group of countries, member countries, will have a common economic body. So European Commission is the economic body for European Union. Okay, fine. Anything else? Fine. This was a relatively smaller chapter. Regional trade agreements, 1 point, easier to execute regional trade agreements. Say for example between Gulf countries, that would be easier to execute. Culturally they are the same, geographically they are close to each other, so those can be called regional trade agreements, easier to execute, displacement cost would be low, like that. Okay. Yes. Okay, now geopolitics में discussing some terms pertaining to geopolitics. Again a small chapter. State actors, non-state actors. State actors can be some institution, a body, etc. Non-state actors can be a business or an individual, right? Okay. Influential people basically can be included in non-state actors. Fine. Then we had drawn this figure and we had divided the countries into various spectrums. Cooperative, non-cooperative, cooperative, non-cooperative, globalization, nationalism. Yes. Okay. Non-cooperation plus nationalism. Do you call such country what? Autarky. Closed economy. North Korea. Okay. Globalization plus non-cooperation. Hegemony. Hegemony. US, China. Okay. Globalization plus cooperative. Multilateralism. Singapore, Germany, Japan. Cooperative plus nationalism. Bilateralism. Classic example India. Okay. Bilateralism. Like we will have separate agreements with each trading partner mostly. We won't adopt the same set of rules with any trading partner. Okay. Fine. That is why bilateral FTAs are being signed between India and other countries. It's not that same set of rules will be applicable with all the countries. Okay. Very much possible. KFTA can be signed only with Eurozone and not all European countries. That is also okay. Possible. Fine. Okay. Now talking about the three bodies which you often come across, IMF, World Bank and WTO. WTO is mainly for overseeing the international trade and disputes pertaining to that. Okay. Then IMF and World Bank, we had discussed the difference. World Bank is there to assist the poor and developing countries by giving them loans. IMF comes to the rescue only when the country is going through some extreme problems like balance of payment problems, it is about to default on its external debt, anything pertaining to that sort. I had given you several examples: Argentina, Iran, yes, okay, Sri Lanka, many such examples, Lebanon, Egypt. IMF had come to the rescue, Greece, to help such countries, Pakistan, like that. Fine. Okay. But then does IMF help freely? Okay, fine, you are in need and I'll help you. It imposes a lot of conditions I had discussed the example of Pakistan, that case study we had discussed that yes, apart from that, government employees' salaries and all has to be cut. Taxes on petroleum products and all will have to be increased so that government will have more revenue in order to be able to repay the loan. So IMF ensures that all these conditions are met like that. Okay. Now talking about geopolitical risk. By the way, just to make sure, why are we learning this chapter? Because in your investments, geopolitical risks do affect you big time. Okay. So now talking about geopolitical risks, first is event risk. Date known. For example, elections. Is the date known of elections? Yes. Outcome unknown. Event risk, then exogenous risk. Is the date known? No. Outcome also not known. For example, earthquakes, tsunami, disaster, anything. Fine. And then thematic risk. We know that such risk is existing and it goes on and on and on, but the effects are slowly felt over a period of time. These are ongoing risks. For example, climate change. We all know that climate change is a major threat which is in existence currently, and slowly this will keep on increasing, and the effects also are now being felt slowly. Okay, climate risk, then cyber risk. Now the risk of AI coming into the picture with the advent of AI, like the deep fakes and all. That all is what? This thematic risk. Okay. Now we had discussed a few tools also. Those tools I had divided in two types, cooperative and non-cooperative tools. But when I talk about those tools, which are those three major tools? National security tools. National security tools make cooperative can be an example of NATO. Okay. All the countries have cooperated to protect each other which are a part of NATO. Non-cooperative national security tools, espionage, which is what? Spying, threats of war, etc. Fine. And now coming to economic tools, again cooperative, non-cooperative. Cooperative economic tools is free trade, no imposition of tariffs, etc. All that is covered basically under free trade. Non-cooperative economic tools will be what? Imposition of tariffs, quota, voluntary export restraints, basically which creates an obstacle in trading, like that. Then financial tools, cooperative, non-cooperative. Cooperative financial tools is capital convertibility, full capital convertibility. US has full capital convertibility. You invest your money there, you will be able to easily withdraw, like that. But if you invest your money in, say, a country like China or Russia, I had discussed capital convertibility is very difficult, especially after Russia-Ukraine war. I had discussed for Russia, McDonald's and Zara and all those companies, when they wanted to stop their business in Russia, what hurdles they were facing. That is a non-cooperative financial tool. Okay, cooperative financial tool, so I already discussed. Non-cooperative is this. Then capital restrictions, sanctions also is non-cooperative financial tool. Sanctions, when US imposes sanctions on countries, means what? Those countries cannot undertake their international trade in which currency? US dollars. If Europe imposes sanctions on some country, that country cannot undertake international trade in euros, like that. Okay, so all these are the tools. Now when it comes to velocity of the risk, there are three kinds of velocity: high velocity, medium velocity, and low velocity. High velocity, impact is felt immediately, but then the effects are not so long lasting. 9/11 attacks. Medium velocity, impact is not felt immediately, but then the risk will be a little long lasting. And low velocity event, impact will be felt late, but then the effect will be extremely long lasting. Like for example, COVID, effect was felt late, the after effects, but then it was long lasting in the form of migration and everything, like that. People permanently working from home, like that. Okay, then I had given you an example of gym. Gym is what? Gym, the muscle soreness is which type of risk? Low velocity risk. The day you work out, will you feel the effect? No, but the next day your muscle will be extremely sore. That is what exactly low velocity risk. Okay, impact is not immediately felt, it will be felt with a lag. Okay, fine. And then we had discussed multi-tools also. Multi-tools mein there was one, cabotage. Cabotage means what? Putting restriction on foreign carrier to operate in domestic country. Matlab if there's a foreign airline, it won't be able to undertake domestic operations, transporting people from Mumbai to Chennai, or not only people, any express parcel, cargo, etc. That is what is cabotage. Okay, fine. We had discussed honey trapping and everything, how it is done, what is the purpose, motto. We had discussed so many things in geopolitics. I hope you remember all those things. Fine. Is there anything else? Scenario analysis and all, definitely you know, discussing several scenarios and seeing the impact of each scenario. What? Long term. US economy's inflation took several months or maybe a few years to bring it under control, or was it brought under control overnight? It takes time, right? So it can be classified as a low velocity risk. Fine. Okay. Yes. Uh, not neither cooperative nor non-cooperative. I mean, how are you cooperating? You are just doing pegging because you want to attract foreign investors. They did not tell you. What if foreign investors want to earn on foreign exchange? They will lose out on that opportunity, the foreign exchange currency fluctuation. So they may perceive it to be non-cooperative, that you are restricting our opportunities like that. Okay, so that cannot be called either cooperative or non-cooperative. Okay, that's just a strategic decision taken by a country. Okay, fine. Now, talking about monetary policy. Monetary policy is actions undertaken by central bank of a country. Okay, by the way, when I talk about central bank and the government policies are called fiscal policies, central bank policies are monetary policies. Should they be independent of each other, or should they work in tandem? They should work in tandem. Okay, but that way they should be independent of each other, like that, but coordination should be there. No one should interfere in the working of another. Now when it comes to central bank, is it job only to control inflation and take care of the interest rates, or it has multiple responsibilities? Now let us discuss several functions and responsibilities of the central bank. Sole supplier of currency. All the currency printing and all is done by whom? The central bank of the country. By the way, can you print, in talking about India, can you print any amount of currency? Yes, that gold standard concept and all has been done away with. Now it is fiat currency. How much ever you want you can print, but then it's not as easy as it sounds. What is the problem with excessive printing of currency? It brings into effect inflationary effects. Okay, which is not good. US economy post COVID had printed so much of currency because it wanted to revive the economy, but then which monster was troubling US? Inflation. It was at a 40-year high, like that. Then talking about banker to the government and other banks, who frames all the policies of the banks and all? The central bank of the country. Okay. Lender of last resort. I had given you the example of Northern Rock Bank, UK. So remember that example. This example pertaining to India, which I had given, Punjab and Maharashtra Cooperative Bank. Fine. After that, holder of gold and foreign exchange reserves. All the forex reserves of the country are held with whom? Central bank. Now in forex reserves, it is not necessary that it will be only foreign currency. It can be foreign currency. It will be foreign currency, gold, SDR, strategic drawing rights. Whenever we get time, one day we'll discuss this at an opportune moment. What is an SDR? How is it useful? What is the procedure? I'll give you in-depth picture of an SDR. Okay, fine. But it is a part of the foreign currency reserves. Then conductor of monetary policy. Of course, this is what the entire chapter is all about. Conductor of monetary policy. I had given you the example of MPC, Monetary Policy Committee. In India, how many members are there in the MPC? 6 members are there in the MPC. 3 comprising internal members and 3 members will be external members nominated by the central government. Okay, and in the 3 internal members, governor, deputy governor and executive director of the RBI, and the voting system is there. Whenever they meet, how many times do they meet in a year? Indian MPC 6 times in a year, bi-monthly. Every alternate month they meet, they discuss the state of affairs of the economy, and basis that they take a call On the last day, the meeting goes on for 3 days whenever they meet. On the last day of the meeting, voting happens whether they want to increase interest rates, reduce interest rates, or keep it the same. If majority wins, if there is a tie, 3 have voted for a vote interest rate increase, and 3 have voted for interest rate remaining constant. Now what is the final outcome? Whose decision prevails? Governor's decision prevails. The governor of RBI, Reserve Bank of India, has the casting vote. Okay, fine. Now in US, this equivalent body is called what? In India we call it MPC, Monetary Policy Committee. In US we call it FOMC, Federal Open Market Committee. It meets how many times a year? 8 times a year to discuss the state of affairs of the economy and accordingly take a call whether interest rates have to be increased or not to be increased, or maybe to decrease it. Fine. Okay. There the members are even more. Fine, no need to remember all that. In this chapter again they have discussed the example and concept of pegging, which we have extensively discussed in the currency chapter. Fine. Okay, now coming to the tools available with the central bank in order to control inflation. One is policy rate. In India, the policy rate is called as repo rate. In US, the policy rate is called Fed funds rate. In UK, it is called refinancing rate. So these are the policy rates, policy tools by which the central bank can control inflation. Second is the reserve ratios. In India, we discussed the example of a cash reserve ratio. Whatever percent of time and demand deposits, and suppose currently the CRR is 4.5%, so 4.5% of demand plus time deposits will have to be maintained by every commercial bank with the central bank of the country, and sad part is it won't get any interest on it. That is cash reserve ratio. SLR, statutory liquidity ratio. Every commercial bank, or to whichever bank this law may be applicable, as a percent of time and demand deposits, certain money will have to be invested in government securities, gold, other liquid securities like that. Okay, and the third tool available to the central bank is OMOs, open market operations, buying and selling of government bonds from the market, open market, like that. Now see what happens is, if there is too much of liquidity in the economy, too much of money floating, circulating in the economy, now due to excess availability of money, what will happen to interest rates? Interest rates will fall. See, interest rates are a function of demand and supply of money. If there is excess money available in the economy and demand is not so much, interest rates will fall because of excess liquidity. Now if I want to, and by the way, interest rates falling means this will fuel inflation because borrowing and all will happen. Now if I want to control inflation, I will have to increase interest rates, so I will suck out the system liquidity by selling bonds. I am the central bank of the country, I will sell bonds and suck out the system liquidity. So lower the system liquidity, more would be the interest rates, right? Okay. Thereafter we had discussed QT, QE, quantitative easing, quantitative tightening. Now somewhere in QE you see glimpses of OMOs, open market operations, but I had discussed the difference between QEs and OMOs. OMOs are sudden and unannounced. QEs are announced in advance. I had given you the example of PEPP, Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program. Remember, European countries they had announced PEPP, which would go on for the next 9 months to 1 year. They had announced in advance how much amount of bonds the central bank is going to buy for the next few months in order to inject liquidity into the system and lower interest rates such that the economy can revive out of COVID. Okay, fine. Then discussing about the goals of central bank. Do all central banks have the same goal? No. When I talk about India, the Reserve Bank of India, what is the goal? To maintain price stability along with a balanced growth. Now when I talk about US, what is the main goal of the US Federal Reserve? To ensure maximum employment. Full employment, don't take it literal words. Full employment here means maximum employment, because some amount of unemployment is good for the economy. That also we had discussed. Otherwise there will be lack of labor availability if the economy is operating at full employment. The wages and all will become very expensive. Okay, fine. Now when I discuss about the central bank increasing or reducing rates, it is mainly the short term rate. The short term rate gets impacted. Okay. Now, what happens is when the central bank, in anticipation of a rate increase, the stock prices, the bond prices, and all start falling. Now, if you want to understand this properly, you have to wait for equity. In equity, when we do equity valuation, you would understand properly. And how would bonds price in response to a rate increase, that also you would understand in fixed income. Those who know fixed income, they know the concept of yield and price having an inverse relationship, right? Okay, so these are the reasons how the central bank actions are going to affect the markets at large. What happens to gold prices when the central bank plans to cut rates? Increases, because when the central bank plans to cut rates, the interest rates in the economy will fall, so your FD rates also are going to fall. Now, by keeping your money in FD on a real basis, you have to see how much interest you are getting. Sometimes it could be even negative because inflation could be more than the rate offered by the. So if the real return is negative, would you want negative real returns? So it is better to then park your money in gold. So these are some of the reasons how asset prices and why asset prices move in response to the monetary policy actions, right? This is called monetary policy transmission. Fine. Now, what are the qualities of a central bank? I had given you one mnemonic to remember. ITC. I stands for independence. Now, independence is of two types: operational independence and target independence. Target independence means what? What is the goal of inflation? I had discussed with you in India what is the goal of inflation in a month. How much should be the inflation reading? In the range of 4 to 6%. Actually, 2 to 6%. Sorry, it is actually 4% with a bandwidth of plus minus 2%. So the range becomes 2 to 6%. This is the range within which inflation month on month should be maintained. Now, there was a situation in India which I had discussed that 9 consecutive months this range was breached. So then what the central bank has to do? Central bank has to write a letter to Government of India explaining the reasons why it was not in a position to control inflation. Why did it fail to control inflation? Then we had discussed there were supply side issues and all which are not in central bank hands and stuff. If you remember those case studies which we had discussed. Operational independence means what? Central bank is given a free hand to manage the economy the way it deems fit. We had discussed Turkish central bank example, neither operational nor target independence. India is having operational independence, Indian central bank. As regards the target independence, it is not the RBI which decides the range of 2 to 6% on its own. The RBI has decided this range in consultation with the central government. Okay, so I can say partial independence is allowed to RBI when it comes to target independence. Okay, T stands for transparency. Whatever the central bank does, whatever actions it takes, do those actions have to be behind closed doors? No. I had explained you the concept of minutes of the meeting. Whenever the MPC meet is conducted, after a few days, minutes of the meeting are released so that you readers, you market participants get to know what was each member's thought process. How do they view the upcoming situation pertaining to inflation and the economy, and accordingly you will be able to understand. Fine. That letter which RBI had written to the central bank explaining its failure to control inflation, was it made publicly available? No. Ideally it should have been made publicly available. I had told you that. IT and last C stands for credibility. You have to walk the talk. I will do this, I will do that. Instead of doing, do it and show it. Instead of saying, do it and show it. That's how it should be. Otherwise, credibility will be affected. So, central banks are very much cautious about their credibility. They do whatever they have committed. US Fed, it had committed that no matter what, we will bring inflation under control. So that is why it was so aggressive in increasing the interest rates in order to bring inflation under control. Now it won't mind if people are losing jobs and stuff, because once it had committed, that it will control inflation no matter what, it is sticking to its word. That is what is the sign of credibility, right? Okay. Now, when I talk about limitations of monetary policy may not always be effective. There could be liquidity trap situations arising in the economy. Liquidity trap situations, which example I had taken? Japan, instead of saving money in the bank, they started hoarding it. Now central bank did the best it could. It kept even negative rates, but then what was the outcome? It failed to achieve the effect of what was the intended outcome, right? Okay. Liquidity trap. Then you cannot force people to consume and spend, right? I have kept, just because interest rates have been 0% or 1%, whatever, can I come and force you all that why don't you spend? It is willing, up to you, it is voluntary if you want to spend it or no, like that. So that I cannot control about people. Fine. Then bond market vigilance. Bond market vigilance means what? They will study the macroeconomic picture of the country, and basis that they will take positions in the bond market. Now if, say for example, government is just going on issuing bonds due to excess issuance of bonds, bond prices will reduce and government bond yields will increase. So bond market vigilance, if they feel that government may not be able to service this debt, they will demand even more yields. So the long term yields will increase even more. So before you getting to know, the bond market vigilance have already punished the markets, the government, for borrowing too much, like that. Okay. Fiscal policy expansionary, and I hope you understand the meaning of expansionary and contractionary. Expansionary is with the intention of expanding the economy. Contractionary is with the intention of shrinking, contracting the economy. Expansionary is done when expansionary monetary policy, typically in a case like COVID. Contractionary monetary policy typically in current scenario where inflation is just going on increasing too much, right? Okay, fine. Similarly, we have expansionary fiscal policy and contractionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy undertaken to expand the economy. Contractionary fiscal policy undertaken to contract the economy. Usually it is more, what, when I talk about fiscal policy, usually it is more of expansive in nature, expansionary in nature, like that. Okay, fine. But when one is expansive, the other is restrictive, then the effect is uncertain. You will have to see which effect has greater dominance. Okay, fine. But when both are expansionary, overall effect would be expansionary. When both fiscal and monetary policy are contractionary, the overall impact also would be contractionary. Right? Okay, fine. Anything that you need to know in this chapter? And I hope you understand how the central bank actions impact the foreign exchange rate. Central bank increasing interest rates, foreigners will be incentivized to invest in India because of higher interest rates. So then what will happen to domestic currency? Increase, appreciate in value, like that. Right now, Fed is not reducing interest rates. Rather, it has not reduced interest rates till now. RBI, one of the reasons it has not reduced interest rates till now is because Fed has not reduced. Because if Fed doesn't reduce the interest rates and RBI reduces the interest rates, the rupee value would depreciate. So in order to maintain the value of the rupee, RBI has not yet decreased interest rates. It is waiting for the Fed to take the first move. To make the first move. So Fed, once it reduces interest rates, thereafter RBI would be in a position to reduce interest rates. So the impact on currency won't be that much, like that. Any doubt pertaining to any question or anything? Today is the Fed meet. Yes, today is the Fed meet. So when you would be sleeping, that is when the Fed outcome would be out. So you'll get to know tomorrow morning. Fine? Okay. Yes? Doubt? Any doubt? Can I proceed? Fine. Now, fiscal policy, we'll discuss fiscal policy, expansionary, contractionary. Acha, now when it comes to fiscal policy, the way government manages a country is out of government income, and out of the income that it receives, it will expend some money. But most of the times, talking about India, the government runs a fiscal deficit. Most of the countries I had shown you run a fiscal deficit. Australia was one such rare example which was having a fiscal surplus. Anyway, what are the sources of revenue of the government? Taxes. Are taxes the only source? Okay. Before proceeding, taxes are of two types: direct, indirect. Okay. Direct taxes are progressive in nature. Indirect taxes are regressive in nature. Now tell me one thing. What are the other sources of revenue for the government apart from taxes? Fines and penalties. Borrowings is not a source of No, interest received, dividends received, that you can call it as a source of revenue. Borrowing is not a source of revenue, it's a capital item. Yeah, service charges and all that it collects by issuing licenses, passports, etc. Public goods pay, whatever minimum. Fines and penalties, so we discussed. Tolls and all that. Cheat money, I had discussed cheat money. When you die, there is no claimant, etc. That money goes to whom? Government. Okay, fine. Expenditure ke sources, so there are multiple. Let's not even get their subsidies and interest payments and all that. So much of Indian government's budget goes towards interest payments, which is yeah, so many things. Okay, fine. Point is, expenditures exceed the income. Fine. Fiscal deficit, to check the health of the government finances, I told you fiscal deficit is calculated as a percent of GDP. Currently it is somewhere around 5.5%. Government is planning to get it down to 4.5% slowly, then to 4%, 3.5%. That I told you was fiscal glide path. So now the government is having good income. If you see month on month, GST collections are all exceeding 1.6, 1.7 trillion, which is a very good sign. Direct tax collections also are increasing. But then expenditure pay, it is, controlling the expenditures, because it has promised that they want to bring down the fiscal deficit as a percent of GDP, like that. Okay. Now talking about discretionary things and automatic stabilizers. Discretionary things are something done by the government on its own will, willingly. For example, I am giving subsidies to the poor. I am waiving off the taxes. Now that is something called discretionary in nature, doing on my own. But now, for example, everything is remaining the same as it is. Due to COVID, tax collections were low. So government's budget went from a surplus to deficit. Now that is what? An automatic stabilizer. Government did not reduce the tax rates. It did not proactively tweak the tax rate. Because there was an economic slowdown, the funds collected from taxes were naturally lower. That is called automatic stabilizer. Okay, fine. Then we had discussed the concept of balanced budget multiplier. But for the balanced budget multiplier, first you understand the concept of fiscal multiplier. Fiscal multiplier is government spending 1 rupee. What effect it has thereafter? It has a multiplier effect, and the formula was what? 1 upon 1 MP MPS 1 upon MPS 1 upon marginal propensity to save. Okay, fine. Monetary multiplier, money multiplier was what? 1 upon reserve requirement. Reserve requirement is what? Basically the banks have to store certain percent of their deposits in reserves, which is sort of a savings for them. So you can remember that way, no? So for fiscal multiplier also, in denominator what will be there? The savings, like that. MPS, marginal propensity to save, plus MPC, marginal propensity to consume, equals 1. Okay. Now government, if it undertakes an expenditure of 100 rupees, remember, as per the fiscal multiplier, for example, the multiplier effect is 2.25. So it will generate demand worth 225. Now the government, in order to recover the expenditure, what was the assumption? The government will increase the taxes by an equal amount. If the government increases taxes by an equal amount, the consumption would drop, but that drop in consumption also would have a multiplier effect. Okay, now say for example that multiplier effect is 2, so it comes to 200. What is the net increase in the demand? 25. Now this is not a balanced budget multiplier. Balanced budget multiplier is when the increase in demand plus the reduction in demand sums up to what? Sums up to 0. Net no effect on the demand. That is the concept of balanced budget multiplier. And if you recall the numbers a little bit, if government spends 100 rupees, it is generating demand worth 225, the cumulative effect, the multiplier effect. So the government had to increase taxes by more than 100. When the government increases taxes by more than 100, that is when the suppression in demand would be 225, and thus resulting in a net 0 demand. Absurd, but yes, that was the concept. Balanced budget multiplier introduced by David Ricardo. Okay, Ricardian equivalence also it is called, Ricardian equivalence. Fine. Now we had discussed some reasons. It was a sort of debate, argument for and argument against too much government debt. Arguments for that, why government debt is beneficial. So tell me a few points. If it is spent in productive purposes like infra and all, it will have a multiplier effect. It will lead to job creation and stuff. Okay. Then other benefit of government spending was, if the debt is owed to internal citizens, then it won't be an issue. Because if it is issued in foreign currency, it might be a problem due to shortage of foreign exchange, like that. Okay. Arguments against, also one more thing, argument for government debt, it may bring the much needed tax reform. So for example, if government feels that it has issued too much of debt and now it needs to collect revenue in order to be able to repay the debt, it may tweak the tax rates, like that. It may bring the much needed tax reforms. Argument against too much of debt, argument against too much of debt would be crowding out effect occurs. Crowding out effect was what? Government is issuing so much of debt. Now government issues debt how? By issuing bonds. The bonds issued by the government, it is supplying too many bonds in the market. Excess supply of anything reduces the price. So bond prices would fall, bond yields would increase. Yield means the interest rate at which government borrows money. So see, due to excessive borrowing, the interest rates of bonds would increase, right? Okay. Can the private sector borrow at a rate lower than the government rate? No, they will have to borrow at an even higher rate, so that the private sector players would be discouraged from borrowing. That is what is the crowding out effect. Okay, fine. Argument against too much of debt, it may lead to increase in tax rates. The people might be disincentivized to work. I had given you one example in 1970s around. The tax rate in India was how much? 97.75%, the direct tax rate. Do you think you will be incentivized to work at such a huge tax rate? So that is again one argument against having too much of debt. And what else? That if the government borrows too much and the country defaults, that point would be applicable in case of external debt issued in foreign currency. Because in case if the debt is issued in internal currency, domestic currency, and if the government is unable to repay, what it will do? Print money and repay. But if the government of India issues debt in dollars, and if government of India faces a shortage of dollars, will it be able to print dollars? No, then it might have to default. So default risk always is associated with external debt and never the domestic debt. One repercussion of printing currency to satisfy the domestic debt obligations would be too much inflation. You investors will get back your money, that's guaranteed, but then due to inflation, what about the value of that money which you get back? Again, it will fall like that. So in real terms, you are getting back lesser money. Okay, fine. Crowding out effect we have discussed. Fine. Markets may tend to lose confidence in the government if it keeps on borrowing too much. Fine. Okay, so these were the arguments for and against being concerned, like that. If the economy is already operating at full capacity, the government, by taking on too much of debt, will it be able to do anything further? No. So again, that is an argument against too much debt. If the economy is already operating at full capacity, taking on extra debt would not really add up to the productive capacity of the economy. But if it is operating below capacity, then it is worthwhile to issue debt and then, increase the productive capacity of the economy and stuff like that. Okay. Understood this? Fine. Transfer payments. What are transfer payments? Subsidies and all. Pension payments given to ex-government employees. All these are called transfer payments. Transfer payments are unilateral in nature. I mean, government won't get anything in return, like that. Okay. Which is easier to change, direct tax or indirect tax? Indirect tax is easier to change because indirect tax is applicable to each and every product, with some exceptions of course. So if government is having a shortage of revenue, the government may increase indirect taxes on alcohol based on the elasticity of demand. If it knows the fact that alcohol and all such products are highly inelastic, the demand for them is highly inelastic, so it can mobilize the much needed revenue. It may increase taxes on indirect taxes, I'm talking about on luxury cars, like that. Fine. Now if you go to purchase a luxury car, GST at 14%, 28% is applicable, 14%, 14% CGST, 14% SGST, and 20% some cess is applicable for on luxury cars. So that's how government mobilizes revenue. If in times of need, it may increase the cess even further, and you guys being buyers of luxury products, you are going to buy irrespective, like that. So it is a way for the government to collect taxes. Direct tax are not so easy to change. Direct taxes are not so easy to change because they impact every section of the society, like that. So in direct taxes, there is no concept of inelastic demand or elastic demand and all, like that. Fine. Okay. And it may affect the poor even more. Fine. Okay. Now talking about your lags. See, government also, it may take time to recognize the problems in the economy. It may take time means there is some lag, there could be some lag. First lag, I had told you one shortcut to remember this. Aishwarya Rai, RAI, and in this same order, recognition lag. First, taking time to recognize the problem. Once the government recognizes the problem, will it take action immediately? No. It will spend some more days, some more time in taking action because of all the bureaucratic these permissions and all required. Action lag. Once the government takes action, is it necessary that the impact will be immediately felt? No, it will take some more time for the impact to be felt. That is called impact lag. RAI, you have to remember in the same order. See, wherever I tell you specifically to remember something in a particular order, please adhere to it. There's a reason why I tell you that. Okay. RAI, you have to remember in a particular order. That free trade areas, customs union, common market, that you have to remember in a particular order. Very important. Okay, fine. Now, there could be additional macroeconomic issues. Despite the government's best efforts, there could still be some issues. I had discussed one philosophy with you in the class that despite all the planning and all, there could be certain unforeseen events which may disturb your entire planning. Archibald Hill and all that example I had discussed. So yeah, same in case of government planning also. Misreading economic statistics, interpretation may there was some error because of which the entire planning was done in a different manner, and that is what was not required, like that. Crowding out effect, labor supply, labor shortages, and all these are the potential problems plaguing the government also. Labor union problems, etc, etc, etc. Fine. Okay. It may have multiple targets. Government does not have to see just one thing. It has to take care of the entire society, so that again with limited resources becomes a problem. And it's not that government requires money, it will print and spend all the money. Again, inflation is always there for you, like that. Understood this? Fiscal policy. Fine. Any issues in fiscal policy? Okay. Now what remains in your macroeconomics? Business cycles. Okay, tell me the 4 business cycles. Expansion, peak, contraction, also called as recession, and trough. Expansion, peak, contraction, trough. Expansion, peak, contraction. These business cycles, are they recurrent in nature? Yes, they are recurrent in nature. Okay. Are they periodic in nature? No. Periodic means do they have fixed time frames that a peak will go on for 8 months and expansion will go on for 12 months? No. They are simply recurrent in nature. The time frame, the time period can differ. Okay, fine. Now, whatever characteristics are applicable in expansion, The exact opposite characteristics will be applicable in case of recession. Whatever characteristics are applicable in case of peak, the exact opposite characteristics will be applicable in case of trough. Yeah. So discussing a few characteristics regarding the peak phase. Employment is increasing. Okay. Wages are increasing. Yes. Availability of labor is decreasing. Yes. Because employment is increasing. Inflation is increasing. Yes. Okay. Worker overtime is reducing because now additional labor is getting hired. Overtime was happening where? Near trough, when the economy is getting out of trough, because I had told you that businesses find it difficult to hire and fire workers, so they won't easily hire nor will they easily fire. So if I see that economy is undergoing a revival, but I'm not sure, so what I'll do is I'll make my existing workers work overtime. Okay, I had given you an example of our admission counselor. If we feel that there is excess demand, then we may appoint one more admission counselor. But if we are still unsure, we make do with the existing admission counselor. We make her work overtime, give her extra money for overtime. Like that, the same is applicable in case of other manufacturing and service industries also. Then in case of peak, inflation accelerates. It is at the top peak. Employment increases but at a decreasing rate. Business spending increases but at a decreasing rate. So you observe one thing, things are increasing but at a decreasing rate. Contraction, exact opposite of expansion. Unemployment will start. Inflation starts falling. Labor is available because काम ही नहीं है तो labor will be easily available, like that. And trough, exact opposite characteristics of peak. Now, inventory to sales ratio. Remember inventory to sales ratio? At the peak, when the economy goes from expansion to peak, what about inventories to sales ratio? Is it high or low? Rather, let me reframe my question. When the economy goes from peak into contraction, what is inventory to sales ratio? High. I told you to remember like this, one simple way. Logically though I had explained, but one simple way to remember was at the peak, direct relation, high. At trough, inventory to sales ratio would be low. Why is it high at the peak? Because sales are suddenly falling and inventory is too much. Because at the peak phase also you must have manufactured and now there is a sudden decline in sales. So inventory to sales ratio will be high once the economy comes out from peak and goes into contraction. Once the economy comes out from trough and goes into expansion, inventory to sales ratio will be low because of unexpected increase in sales, and at the same time inventory is less. And during recession and all, you must have sold your inventory at fire sale prices, at heavy discounts and all. That is another reason why inventory is less, and you must have stopped manufacturing, or maybe you must be manufacturing less. So these are the several reasons. Fine. Now discussing about housing activity. It is majorly dependent on 4 factors. Consumer disposable income. Once income levels increase, housing demand will increase. Interest rates, major factor in determination of demand. Interest rates, lower the interest rates, more the demand for housing, and vice versa. Demographic factors, very important. India, why is the housing demand and all increasing so much? Because we have the youngest demographic in the world, the most number of people in the working age of 15 to 64 years. And lastly, the 4th point is the speculative activity. People buy houses for investment purposes also, because of which the prices are hyped up. We had discussed the other day. Okay, fine. So that income levels, they have used such words: consumer installment debt to income. Now when the consumer is able to afford the EMI, that is when the housing demand would increase, which ultimately means when the consumer's income levels would increase, the housing demand would increase, like that. Talking about imports and exports. Imports, are they dependent on importing countries' progress or exporting countries' progress? Imports are highly dependent on importing countries' progress. Exports are highly dependent on the importing countries' progress. I mean, if China is the exporter, China will want that India should have good economic growth and all, so that they are able to import our goods. So China would be dependent on India's economic progress, like that. Okay, fine. And of course, if India also wants to import, it will be dependent on India's economic progress, like that. But you just be careful of the angle from where you see. Okay, why is China facing a global? Why is China facing issues? Because consumption internally has been the low only, and it is not able to catch up with exports also, simply because globally the importing countries are going through a slowdown. That's the reason, right? Okay, so that is why countries are now more and more focusing on internal consumption, independence. They don't want interdependence, they now want independence, Atmanirbhar Bharat and all that stuff. So it is an outcome of all this. Fine. Then discussing about indicators, which are the three types of indicators? Leading, coincident and lagging. Which indicator gives you a signal in advance? Leading indicator. For example, equity markets. If equity markets are increasing, and I had told you markets always function on the basis of future expectations. So if markets are increasing, what is the sign? That economic revival could be on the cards. I am not saying is on the cards. I cannot state with certainty just by looking at one indicator. You have to look at multiple indicators. A group of multiple indicators is called as what? Composite. Composite is a group of multiple indicators. So it could be a composite leading indicator, composite lagging indicator, composite coincident indicator, like that. Okay, fine. I had shown that example from the website Chicago, this CME, something I had shown, if you remember. Chicago Mercantile Exchange, they had compiled indicators, groups of indicators. I mean, they had combined several leading indicators together, several coincident indicators together, several lagging together, and we had studied and interpreted those indicators, like that. Okay. Also, I told you, never see any one indicator in isolation, always see multiple indicators. But more emphasis, if you are seeing multiple indicators together, which indicator would you place more emphasis on? Leading indicator, because it is telling you about what's next. Lagging indicator will tell you about what has already happened. Coincident indicator will tell you about what is currently happening. Okay, now we had discussed it logically, the leading, lagging, coincident indicators. Let me take 1-2 examples. Leading indicators, I already discussed one, equity markets. Second was residential building permits. Yes, buildings take long lead times to get constructed, so that again can be considered as a leading indicator. Builder will take permits in advance and not at that very time. Okay, then ratio of consumer installment debt to income is what? It is a lagging indicator. Because my income has increased, thereafter I'll be taking more loan because I can afford a higher EMI. So it will always be a lagging indicator. Inflation also will be a lagging indicator. We will come to know only after the fact. And inflation is always reported month on month. So once we have the data available of how much the prices and all have increased, then only we can report inflation numbers. So it becomes a lagging indicator, like that. Okay. Central bank actions, again lagging indicator. Central bank will increase interest rates only once the inflation has increased. No, okay, in anticipation of an increase in inflation, only once inflation has increased. So that again will be called a lagging indicator. Coincident indicator, which is happening at the same time. I had discussed PMI, Purchasing Managers Index. Then employer increasing the income, that also is a coincident indicator. See, in advance I won't increase your income, neither will I increase your income with a lag. As and when business is improving, I may increase your income. So it is considered as a coincident indicator. Here at times it could get confusing that this seems to be a coincident indicator also, this seems to be a leading indicator also. So finally, what did I tell you? Having learned everything logically, one thing, this you remember, which indicator falls under which, leading, lagging or coincident, like that. Okay, fine. Then we had done the concept of nowcasting. Forecasting के लिए I need time to time updated data, but unfortunately that is not available. So now the concept of nowcasting has come into play. So whatever data I have, say I have 3 months old data, for me that is the latest data, I will extrapolate that into the current data and predict what could be the current scenario. basis whatever info I have available. That is called nowcasting. Okay, fine. Anything else in business cycles? Anything else that I'm missing out on? Monthly. PMI is also released monthly, Purchasing Managers Index. No, coincident. They have classified it as a coincident, but if you ask me, it will more likely be a leading indicator. PMI. I'll tell you why. Because PMI, I had explained you the method how PMI is calculated. It is survey based. Okay, if you are the purchasing manager of a particular company, I'll take your interview and I'll ask you questions regarding your production levels, your inventory levels, and all that. Future. What do you expect the production levels? Have you purchased any raw material in order to manufacture? So I'm wanting to know a future picture from your end. So it becomes what? Leading indicator, like that. But again, why a coincident indicator? Because some questions which I ask you are about your production which have already been undertaken. Okay, how much production have you already undertaken and all. So that becomes a sort of lagging indicator. So the average of two, you can consider it as a coincident indicator. It is telling you something about the future picture also, something about what has already happened. So beach ka, the average would be coincident indicator, like that. With that logic, I can think of as a coincident indicator, no other logic. Fine. Okay. Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree. Okay, once my business has done well, thereafter I may increase wages and salaries and all with a lag. So that can be considered a lagging indicator. I absolutely agree. Coincident means what? Literally increasing at the same time as your business is improving. But now since curriculum and Schwezer book, Schwezer to theek hai, curriculum book has given it as a coincident indicator. So we have to follow the curriculum book. Yeah. Okay. I told you there could be disputes between what you interpret and how you interpret, and that's absolutely open for interpretation, like that. So there could be no single thumb rule that this is classified as a coincident only, or this is. Some are very obvious. Some are very obvious that they make sense if they are leading indicators like equity markets, residential building permits and all. But some what they have given, I don't think makes sense, especially this income which we just discussed, like that. Okay, fine. Anything else that you need to know? Again, highly theoretical. Currency is the only chapter where you have some solving. Okay. And some bit of it here and there in fiscal policy, your multiplier calculation and all that. But apart from that, anything? Acha, fiscal multiplier I had shown you this way, right? 1 upon MPS. It could also be 1 upon 1 minus MPC net of tax. And I think in the book they have given this one. 1 upon 1 minus MPC net of tax. So please stick to this one. Okay. Yes, please ask any questions. I hope you were able to recall whatever we discussed. I'm sure you would have forgotten given your regular studies. Okay. But I'm glad that is helping you. If not, can I stop?